Hey everyone, this is Jenna from Musings from the Middle School. I've gotten several emails from many of my readers asking to talk a little bit more about how I teach writing. I have to admit, I'm actually not really surprised by this. In my opinion, teaching writing is probably the most difficult thing I've ever had to do. When I first started, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, and it took me a long time to really sort of get a handle on how to teach middle school kids to be writers. Fortunately, early in my career, I had the opportunity to work with a lot of really great mentor teachers and coaches in my district who pointed me in the right direction and led me to a lot of really great professional development reading resources that I could use to help me get better at teaching kids how to write. What you see here are some of the books that absolutely changed the way I teach writing in my classroom, and I still reference them all the time. They are, really the core of the writing program that I use in my room today. The heart of my writing program is absolutely a writer's notebook. I don't even know how I would teach writing without a writer's notebook. I just find that it's absolutely the doorway that kids need to sort of enter into the world of becoming a writer. And I don't know of any better way to get kids to buy into writing than through writer's notebook. Now, as you're going to see throughout this video, I'm not exactly a writer's notebook purist. My kids do get an awful lot of choice, but I just find that because of, trying to get kids to master the Common Core standards, I need to be able to give a little bit more specific instruction. So as you're going to see, I do try to offer a lot of choice, which is essential in a writer's notebook program, but you will see that I do tend to guide them in their choices. I like to call it, guided choice, really. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is how to get started with writer's notebook. I pretty much spend the entire month of September getting the notebook set up and getting kids used to writing in the notebook every day. The first thing that we do is we number all the pages in our notebook. This is a little bit of a daunting task. It takes the kids a while and they have to really concentrate so that they don't make a mistake. But I usually do this on the first or second day of school when the kids are still, pretty timid and still trying to, figure out the way of your room. This is a great activity for them to do, to just sort of, sit, relax. It takes about 20 minutes. They have to really focus. And, you're going to be so glad that you did number the pages in your notebook, because it makes it so much easier to go back and reference something when the pages are numbered. The next thing that we do is we set up a spot in the back of our notebook that will sort of, keep all of the information that we get from the mini lessons that I teach throughout the year. What I like to do is put a index in the back. So, we just title it, sorry, that's my kids crying. We just title it mini lesson index, and we, save like a page or two so we can title each one of the mini lessons and put the page numbers of the mini lessons right there so the kids can go back and reference them throughout the school year. The last, I would say, 30 to 40 pages in our notebook we reserve for any of the notes or the anchor posters that come from the mini lessons that I teach throughout the year. So, if there's an anchor chart, I just, can give a copy to the kids. They cut it out, they glue it in. Sometimes I may have them take some notes. They, and that'll go back here as well. But we like to have all the mini lessons all together in one spot in the back of the notebook so that kids can go back and reference them, anytime that they're writing throughout the school year. Our last step here of the setup process is I have the kids glue a revising and editing checklist inside the front cover of their notebook. And, this is just something that they can go back and reference every time they write something. And it just has a sort of list of things that I expect middle schoolers to be able to, check for themselves whenever they're doing a piece of writing. All right, so now we've got our notebooks all set up. Now comes part 2. What are we going to put in them? And I usually spend about the first month of the school year just getting kids used to writing in the notebook. A lot of times, kids are reluctant writers more often than not. Writing is something kids don't love to do. They're intimidated by the process. They don't necessarily feel like they're good at it. They may or may not, have had a lot of success with it before. So I like to sort of ease them into using their writer's notebook. I want to look to build some stamina. I need middle schoolers to be able to write for 30 to 40 minutes, without stopping. So we tend to focus a lot of the beginning of the year on just sort of, working our way through the notebook. And what I like to do is I like to have the kids create a series of lists that we put in. And, each day we sort of grab something from our list and we just, do a little writing on it. We spend a lot of time in September writing lists. This is a pretty standard writer's notebook activity. I have a ton of different ones that I have the kids do throughout the first month of school. If you play around on Pinterest, you'll find, millions of different sort of lists you can have the kids put in their notebook. If you read any of the authors who write a lot about teaching writing, Nancy Atwell, Lucy Calkins, Ralph Fletcher, Kelly Gallagher, Jeff Anderson, you'll find countless ideas for lists that you can have the kids put into their notebook. So once we have a list created, what I do is I just have the kids spend like the first, 15 to 20 minutes of writing class each day, picking something from one of their lists and just, writing. This is purely a stamina exercise. I'm not collecting their writer's notebook. I'm not looking to grade any of this. This is just supposed to be about, building stamina, playing around with words. There's no pressure because it's not collected, it's not graded. And, it's just really, like I said, it's just really building up their stamina, getting them used to, doing some sustained writing over a longer period of time. So after, about 4 to 6 weeks of just practicing in our writer's notebook, that's when I really start getting to the more sort of, specific writing lessons. We are a Common Core state, so in middle school, our kids are expected to be able to write narratives, write to inform and explain, and write an argument paper. So those are sort of the 3 domains that I stick to throughout the year. So while I do teach all 3 of those domains, the ones I just mentioned, narrative writing, writing to inform and explain, and argument writing, I have to say probably about 50% of what I have the kids do throughout the year is narrative writing. And the reason why is because it gets kids invested. Writing takes an awful lot of self-motivation. Kids have to be sort of intrinsically motivated. They have to start seeing themselves as writers. They have to want to be good at it. And I have an easier way getting kids to buy into it through narrative writing than I do, through the other domains. So I certainly spend, a good chunk of the beginning of the year doing a lot of narrative writing with the kids, to get them to start seeing themselves as writers, getting them to buy into the writing process. And, then as we move into the more difficult domains, the writing to inform and explain and the argument writing, I still pepper those units with some narrative writing in the middle. Otherwise, kids tend to get burnt out too fast. Our district uses trimesters, and what I find is that throughout an entire school year, I have approximately 15 graded pieces per kid, about 5 per trimester. As I just said, the first trimester is a whole lot of narrative writing. I also like to include some fun, writing activities, so like spooky snapshots around Halloween or writing some flash fiction. We also do writing to inform and explain. We do some compare and contrast. We do quite a bit of literary analysis. And we do argument writing, which is probably one of the most difficult, but I also find that if I approach it just right, the kids really do love it. They really get into argument writing. They love to have, debates. They like to argue. Middle schoolers love to argue. So if you can just get them to sort of translate that love of argument from their mouths to a page, you've really got something special. So regardless of what domain or what topic I am working on, I always start with a mentor piece for the kids to look at. The mentor piece that I share with the kids is reflective of whatever topic we're going to be writing on. Some years I have students who produce, such amazing pieces of writing that I ask them permission to keep their work to share with, other teachers and students in the future. And, they're so generous and kind to allow me to do that. And if I if I don't have a great example from a kid, then sometimes I'll just, write my own. But I always want kids to see a mentor piece before they get started. I want them to have an idea of where they're going before they get started on this journey. Mentor pieces are always handled, the same way, regardless of what topic we're going to be writing about. I give a copy to the students that I shrink down on the copy machine so that it's small enough for kids to glue right into their writer's notebooks, and then they do a close reading of it. When I ask students to do a close reading of a mentor piece of writing, I'm asking them to look for ways the author is effective in telling their story. So it's not exactly the same as, doing a close reading of, say, a piece of fiction for a literary analysis. The kids, when they're doing this close reading, are focused specifically on the writer's craft, how the writer structures their piece, the author's word choice, techniques that the writer does that really sort of engage the reader. We're examining this piece for what makes this good? Why is this a good piece of writing? Is it a good piece of writing? What strategies do you like that this author uses? What strategies confused you? We're just really trying to get a handle of, okay, here is what we're supposed to be doing. Let's take a look at somebody who's done it already, and let's sort of pull it apart and see see how they approach this topic. So once we've picked apart our mentor piece, the kids now have, a pretty good idea of what it is I am expecting them to be able to do. So now it's time for them to start brainstorming. To help kids brainstorm for the topic that we're going to be writing about, I give them a top 10 list. And what I ask them to do is, take our big idea, our big topic. Let's say, we're writing about lessons learned. And what I ask them to do is come up with 10 stories from their lives that they could write about that reflect our big topic. And this is, where you see sort of writer's notebook clash with, more sort of traditional writing instruction. Pure writers, if I was a writer's notebook purist, I would give the kids, complete and total choice. But as I said before, I sometimes I feel like I can't always do that because I'm trying to get kids to, master or at least practice certain Common Core standards. So I have to have a little bit more guidance in there. So this is how I sort of, combine my love of writer's notebook with, some more kind of traditional writing instruction. I give them the big topic, but then within that topic, they get to decide, what story they're gonna tell. Now, it's important that you do one of these top 10 lists too. So typically, after we go through our mentor piece, we talk about, the expectations for whatever topic we might be doing. I give out this top 10 list. They work on it, and I work on it myself right under the document camera so they can see me doing it. Now, the reason that you have to do a top 10 list is because the next day, your students are going to watch an expert writer in action. And that expert writer is, you guessed it, you. Now, I know this part makes teachers really nervous, but I'm hoping by the time I'm done talking to you, you feel a little bit better about writing in front of your kids and understanding why having your students watch you write is one of the most important parts of this process. So anytime you're trying to learn how to do anything, one of the best ways is to start by observing somebody else do it. I really can't think of anything I've ever learned to do where I haven't started by watching somebody else do it. It's the same with writing instruction. Your kids have to observe a writer in action. Don't bug out if you think you are not cut out for doing this. You are. You absolutely are. You do not need to be an expert writer here. In fact, the less of an expert you are, kind of the better it's going to be. Because what kids need to understand is that writing is a process that's messy and difficult and frustrating. And they need to understand that, number one, that is okay. It is okay to feel all those things. And that number two, there is ways to work yourself out of the binds that writers find themselves in. And truly, the only way for them to get this is by watching you do it. So I am constantly composing in front of my class. I make a million mistakes, and I give them observation sheets for them to record all of my mistakes. That way they're not screaming them out all the time, because they love to do that. But, this is a way for them to just sort of focus on what I do and then sort of write down what they see. But kids need to see a writer writing. It's an essential part of the process. So, if it makes you nervous, I apologize. I don't know how else to get to, I don't know what else to say except just please try it. If you want to sort of prepare something a little bit the day ahead, that's fine, but I'm going to tell you that the actual struggle is the most important thing for them to see. So the less you prep for this part, I think the more beneficial it is for your kids. So after your kids have watched you compose, and they see that it's not an easy process and it takes an awful lot of work, now it's time for them to do some writing. And what I find kids need most is time. Once I give kids a topic, once I know they've brainstormed for it and they have 10 decent ideas, I usually give them about 3 full days just to play with those ideas. They might start one and, write about it for 10 minutes and then say, oh, I don't really like this. And, they draw a line in their writer's notebook, and right underneath they start writing something else. Or, they'll find that they have one that they're like, yes, this is exactly what I want to write about. Here's the story I want to tell. And they get a day into it and they realize, this is not really turning out the way I want. And then they start something new. But kids really need time to play with their work. So I find like 3 full days is, just about it. After 3 full days, kids have a pretty good idea of what story is going to work for them. And, they're ready to proceed. Now, what am I doing during these 3 days while the kids are drafting? Well, a few things. Most often you will find me going around and doing one-on-one writing conferences. I try to get to, I really try to only spend about 5 minutes with each kid. So in about 30 minutes of drafting time, I usually can get to about 5 kids. So, one-on-one writing conferences is one of my favorite ways to spend this time. It's how I really get to know kids as writers, and it's how I really get to see like what their strengths are and also, what their weaknesses are. Something else you may find me doing is pulling a small group for some, small group instruction. If I find I have, 5 or 6 kids who are really struggling with the same issue, something like punctuating dialogue, or they're really struggling with organization, then I'll pull a small group to my horseshoe table and do sort of a few mini lessons to kind of help them out and get them back on track. Now, on each of the drafting days, so those 3 or 4 days where I'm just having the kids draft and, play around with their ideas, I always start each lesson with a 5 to 10 minute mini lesson. The mini lessons that I teach focus on either craft, structure, or language. Now, most of my mini lessons are grounded in the Common Core State Standards, but what I will completely admit to is that oftentimes I have to look at standards from previous grade levels and design some mini lessons around those. For example, I'm thinking right off the top of my head, at 3rd grade, one of the 3rd grade standards is being able to use simple and complex sentences. Well, using complex sentences is something that not all middle school students can do. Therefore, I have to usually incorporate a mini lesson or 2 into my middle school classroom that addresses this standard. So when I'm designing these mini lessons, they come more based on the need I see from the kids in front of me, rather than, really sort of pounding into those standards that I have for my grade level. So after kids have spent a few days drafting and they have, a first draft, then we work on revising. Now, I always argue to the kids that revising is the single most important part of the writing process, and they always get annoyed with this because they hate to revise, because kids feel that once they've written it down and it's on a piece of paper, and they are considered themselves done, then it's done, and they shouldn't have to go back and work on it more. So I spend an awful lot of time sort of pounding into their head that revising is when real writing actually happens, because anybody can dump words down onto a piece of paper, but it's then sort of playing with those words and moving them around and rethinking them and focusing on our word choice. That is what makes us a writer. And the difference between being just a kid who writes and a writer is that a writer knows that they're never, ever, ever really done. And we need to do an awful lot of revising to get our piece exactly where we want it. One of my favorite revising strategies is to do read-around groups. I am by no means the inventor of read-around groups. If you Google this, you'll find a million different approaches to them. Find one that works for you. I have one that I know works for me pretty well, and this is the way we primarily spend our time, our revising time. I'm not a big fan of peer revising or peer conferencing. I don't really find that to be very effective. I find that kids have a hard time giving each other meaningful feedback beyond, oh, it's pretty good, but you should add more details, because that's what they always say. They have a really difficult time getting beyond that, and so it's not necessarily a beneficial process for anyone that I found. I mean, maybe you have a great way to do this. Please share it with me, because I'd love to know. But for 10 years, I've been trying to make peer conferencing work, and I've never been able to do it. But read-around groups I do find to be pretty effective. So, give them a try. I think you'll like them. Your kids will like them too. And then finally, I'm going to talk to you about grading. Now, you're going to see that my grading policy for writing is not exactly what we would call a traditional grading policy. So, feel free to ignore everything that I'm saying and stick with the way you do it, but I just want to share with you how I approach it. So I do use a rubric to grade students' writing. I have, such a love-hate relationship with rubrics. I love them for many reasons, and I hate them for many other reasons. But all in all, I have never really been able to find a more effective way to grade writing than a rubric. When I first started, I used a rubric that had 6 points. It was a 6-point rubric. And then as the years went on, my rubric shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. And now I'm at a point where I am using a 3-point rubric. You can get a 3, a 2, or a 1. A 3 means, yes, you've got it. This is awesome. A 2 means, you're almost there, a few little things, and it's perfect. And a 1 means, you gave it a shot, but we've got some things to work on. Now, here's where things get, maybe a little bit controversial, and you might not, necessarily be comfortable with this approach. So again, ignore what I'm saying then. By all means, continue doing it the way you do it. But I just, want to share with you a little bit about my philosophy when it comes to grading writing. So on the rubric that I give to the kids, that I staple right to their paper with their grade on it, I have this paragraph. Becoming a great writer takes lots and lots of effort and practice. And then even with lots of effort and practice, many people never become great at it. All I ask is that you give it your best shot, have enough pride in your work to make it readable, take risks, and experiment with words and ideas. Dare to pour your heart out onto the page, and you will do fine in this class. Now, I take that philosophy to heart, and here is how my rubric translates into gradebook grades. A 3 is 100, a 2 is an 82, and a 1 is a 70. So what that essentially means is that if a kid finishes their writing, hands it in on time, hands it in with, whatever sort of criteria I give them, typically, I want to see it typed, 12-point font, has to be like Times New Roman, double spaced. If they follow all my rules, they hand it in on time, the lowest grade that they can get from me is a C. Now, I know some people have a hard time with this, because if kids are not great writers, then you think, well, why should I be giving them a C? My philosophy is this: writing is not easy to do. And if you scare kids away and make them feel like they are bad writers, they will never, ever, 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 ever improve. So for me, if, even if they are just not great writers, they are struggling, they struggle. If they do what I ask, if they try their best, if they give me their all, they're going to do fine in my class. Kids really only fail my class if they don't hand their work in. But if they try, if they give it their best shot, then they're going to be okay. And this, like I said, I know a lot of people might not agree with this philosophy, but I found it always works for me. When a kid knows they can always recover, sometimes if kids, get an F on 3 or 4 papers in a row, they start to feel like, I'm never going to recover from this, so why even bother? But if kids always feel like they have a shot, if they can do a good job, they can always make it a little bit better, then I find they're just a lot more invested. So, this is the philosophy that I have. This is how I use my rubric. This is how it translates into my grades. But again, you do not have to do it the way I do it. By all means, develop your own strategy. All right, so there you have it. I can't really think of, anything else to put in this already excruciatingly long video. If you made it this far, then I am so grateful for, you taking the time to watch my, ramblings on about how to teach writing. I'm going to put links to a lot of the stuff that you might have seen throughout this video in the blog post. If you have any questions about anything you've seen, please feel free to ask, and I'll be happy to get back to you. But thanks so much for watching. Have a great day, and happy teaching.